Picture this. You're walking through a quiet garden at dusk. The air is still, and you notice something curious. A sunflower, its face heavy with seeds, turning gently toward the fading light. If you look closer, really closer, you might see something unexpected. A pattern, spiraling outward from the center, curving in two directions at once. And here's the thing, this isn't random. This same pattern appears in seashells washed up on distant shores, in the curve of a galaxy spinning through space, in the way a pinecone's scales overlap perfectly. It's like nature is whispering a secret over and over in a language we're only just beginning to understand. So what is this hidden code, and why does it show up everywhere, from the smallest leaf to the largest storm? Tonight, we're going to explore that mystery together, gently, slowly, letting the answers unfold like the spirals themselves. My name is Alara, and welcome to the Late Night Science Channel. This is a place where we slow down, where we let curiosity guide us through the quiet corners of the natural world. If you're here looking for something peaceful, something that helps you relax, you've found the right place. And if you enjoy this kind of journey, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to subscribe. It helps me keep making these videos for you. So where do we start? Let's begin with something simple. Something you've probably seen 100 times without really noticing. Think about a fern unfurling in the spring. Each new frond curls outward in a tight spiral, slowly opening as it grows. Or consider a snail shell, that smooth, continuous curve that winds around and around, always getting bigger but never losing its shape. These aren't just pretty designs, they're built on a foundation, a mathematical sequence that's been quietly shaping life for millions of years. This sequence, it has a name. It's called the Fibonacci sequence. Now, don't let the word sequence make you think this is complicated, because it's not. It's beautifully simple. You start with the number 1, then another 1. Add them together, you get 2. Add 1 and 2, you get 3. Add 2 and 3, you get 5. Then 8, then 13, 21, 34, and so on. Each number is just the sum of the 2 that came before it. That's it. That's the whole rule. But here's where it gets interesting. This simple pattern, this quiet progression of numbers, shows up again and again in the natural world, in the way leaves arrange themselves around a stem, in the number of petals on a flower, in the spirals of a seashell. And tied closely to this sequence is another number, one that's fascinated people for thousands of years. It's called the golden ratio, and it's often written as the Greek letter phi. This number, approximately 1.618, represents a special kind of balance. When you divide a line so that the smaller part relates to the larger part in the same way the larger part relates to the whole, you get the golden ratio. It sounds a bit abstract, I know, but what it creates is a sense of harmony, a proportion that feels, well, just right. You see it in art, in architecture, in the human body, and yes, in nature too. But why? Why does nature favor this particular number, this specific pattern? What makes it so special that it appears in plants, animals, weather systems, even galaxies? These are the questions we'll explore tonight, gently, slowly, letting the answers unfold like the spirals themselves. Let's start by looking more closely at what these Fibonacci numbers actually are. At their heart, they're just a sequence, a list of numbers that grows in a very particular way. But this isn't a random list, it's a pattern that builds on itself. each number connected to the ones that came before it. And this self-building quality is what makes it so powerful. It's like a spiral that keeps expanding, always connected to its beginning, but always reaching outward, growing, evolving. In nature, growth happens in stages. A seed becomes a sprout becomes a plant produces flowers, flowers become seeds. Each stage builds on the last, just like the Fibonacci sequence. And because growth takes time and energy, living things need to be efficient. They can't waste resources. They need to find the best way to capture sunlight, to spread their seeds, to build structures that are strong but not too heavy. And it turns out, this Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio that comes from it offer a kind of blueprint for doing just that. Imagine you're a plant and you need to arrange your leaves so that each one gets as much sunlight as possible. If you place them randomly, some leaves will shade others, and that's wasted energy. But if you arrange them in a spiral, each new leaf growing at a specific angle from the last, you can minimize that overlap. And the angle that works best is related to the golden ratio, about 137.5 degrees. This angle, sometimes called the golden angle, ensures that leaves are spread out evenly around the stem, so no leaf blocks the other's access to light. This isn't something plants consciously decide to do. It's not like they sit there with a calculator figuring out angles. Instead, this pattern emerges naturally from the way plants grow. As a new leaf bud forms, it grows in the space that's most available, the space that's furthest from the existing leaves. And because of the way growth hormones spread through the plant, that space just happens to be at the golden angle. It's a beautiful example of how complex patterns can arise from simple rules. And it's not just leaves. Look at the center of a sunflower, at those tightly packed seeds. They're arranged in two sets of spirals, one curving clockwise, the other counterclockwise. If you count the number of spirals in each direction, you'll often find Fibonacci numbers like 34 and 55, or 55 and 89. This arrangement allows the sunflower to pack the maximum number of seeds into the smallest space without leaving gaps or wasting room. It's efficient, elegant, and it happens without any planning or design. Now, let's think about seashells for a moment. If you've ever picked up a shell on the beach, you've probably noticed that spiral shape, that smooth curve that winds outward from the center. This shape, too, is related to the Fibonacci sequence. As the creature inside the shell grows, it needs more space. But it can't just make the shell bigger all at once. Instead, it adds new material in a spiral, each new section proportionally larger than the last. This creates what's called a logarithmic spiral, a shape that maintains the same proportions as it grows. The nautilus shell is probably the most famous example of this. If you cut a nautilus shell in half, you'll see a series of chambers, each one slightly larger than the one before. The curve that connects these chambers follows the golden ratio, creating a spiral that's both beautiful and functional. It allows the nautilus to grow without changing the overall shape of its shell, maintaining balance and buoyancy as it moves through the water. But why does this matter? Why should we care about spirals and ratios and numbers? Well, for one thing, it shows us there's a hidden order in nature, a set of rules that govern how things grow and develop. And understanding these rules can help us make sense of the world around us. It can also inspire us, reminding us that beauty and efficiency often go hand in hand. Take the branching of trees, for example. If you look at a tree in winter when the leaves have fallen and you can see the bare branches, you'll notice a pattern. The trunk splits into a few large branches, and each of those branches splits into smaller ones, and so on. This branching pattern is recursive, meaning it repeats at different scales, and it's efficient, allowing the tree to reach as much sunlight as possible with the least amount of material. This same kind of branching appears in rivers and streams, in the veins of leaves, in the bronchi of lungs, in lightning bolts. It's a fractal pattern, a shape that looks similar at different scales. And while fractal branching isn't exactly the Fibonacci sequence, they're related. Both are examples of how simple rules can create complex, beautiful structures. The Fibonacci sequence also appears in unexpected places, like the breeding patterns of rabbits. This was actually how the sequence was first introduced to Europe by a mathematician named Leonardo of Pisa, known as Fibonacci. He posed a problem. If you start with a pair of rabbits, and each month every mature pair produces a new pair, how many pairs will you have after a year? The answer follows the Fibonacci sequence: 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 5 pairs, 8 pairs, and so on. It's a simplified model, of course, but it shows how the sequence can describe growth over time. Let's drift now into the world of flowers. If you've ever counted the petals on a flower, you might have noticed something interesting. Many flowers have petal counts that match Fibonacci numbers. Lilies have 3 petals, buttercups have 5, delphiniums have 8, marigolds have 13, asters have 21, and daisies often have 34, 55, or even 89. Of course, not every flower follows this pattern, and there's variation even within species. But the tendency is there, and it's strong enough to make you wonder why. The answer, again, comes back to efficiency. The number of petals and the way they're arranged affects how the flower attracts pollinators. Flowers with petal counts that follow Fibonacci numbers tend to have a balanced, symmetrical appearance that's pleasing to both insects and humans. This symmetry can make the flower more visible, more attractive, and more likely to be pollinated. And successful pollination means more seeds, which means the plant's genes get passed on to the next generation. But it's not just about attracting pollinators. The arrangement of petals also affects how the flower develops. As the flower grows, each petal needs space. If they're arranged according to the golden angle, they'll be evenly distributed, avoiding overlap and allowing each petal to develop fully. It's similar to the way leaves arrange themselves around a stem, and it's driven by the same underlying principles. There's something deeply satisfying about discovering these patterns. It's like finding a secret code hidden in plain sight, and the more you look, the more you see them. In the arrangement of pinecone scales, in the spiral of a pineapple, in the way cacti grow their spines, in the curve of a ram's horn, in the whirl of a fingerprint. These patterns aren't coincidences. They're the result of millions of years of evolution, of life finding the most efficient ways to grow, to reproduce, to survive. And here's something else to consider. These patterns exist at every scale, from the microscopic to the cosmic. At the level of DNA, molecules arrange themselves in spirals. At the level of cells, they divide and multiply in patterns that echo Fibonacci numbers. At the level of organisms, bodies grow and develop following these same principles. And at the level of galaxies, stars and gas swirl in enormous spirals that span light years. This universality suggests that the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio aren't just quirks of biology. They're fundamental properties of the universe, woven into the fabric of space and time. They appear wherever there's growth, wherever there's change, wherever patterns emerge from chaos. Let's pause here and think about spirals for a moment. Spirals are everywhere in nature, and they come in different forms. There are Archimedean spirals, where the distance between each turn is constant. There are logarithmic spirals, where each turn is proportionally larger than the last. And there are Fibonacci spirals, which are a specific type of logarithmic spiral based on the Fibonacci sequence. The reason spirals are so common is that they're an efficient way to grow. If you're a plant or an animal and you need to add new material as you grow, a spiral allows you to do that without changing your overall shape. It's a form of self-similarity, where the structure looks the same at different scales. This is important for maintaining balance, for distributing weight, for ensuring that the organism can function properly as it grows. Spiral growth also allows organisms to pack material tightly. Think about a coiled snake or a rolled-up fern frond. By curling into a spiral, the organism can protect itself, conserve space, or store energy. And when it's time to grow or move, the spiral can unfurl smoothly without breaking or tearing. In the ocean, many creatures use spirals for protection. Snails, clams, and other mollusks build spiral shells that grow with them. These shells are made of calcium carbonate, a hard material that protects the soft body inside. The spiral shape distributes stress evenly across the shell, making it strong and resistant to crushing. And because the shell grows in a spiral, the creature doesn't need to abandon it and build a new one as it gets bigger. It just adds new material to the edge, expanding the spiral outward. Even in the world of weather, spirals appear. Hurricanes and cyclones are enormous spiral systems driven by the rotation of the Earth and the movement of warm and cold air. These spirals can span hundreds of miles, and they concentrate energy in their centers, creating the intense winds and rains that characterize these storms. The spiral shape allows the storm to organize itself, to maintain its structure, and to draw in energy from the surrounding environment. And if we look up at the night sky, we see spirals there too. Many galaxies, including our own Milky Way, are spiral galaxies. These are vast collections of stars, gas, and dust swirling around a central core. The spiral arms of a galaxy are regions where new stars are forming, where gas and dust are compressed by gravitational forces. The spiral structure helps the galaxy maintain its shape, distributing matter and energy across billions of miles. The fact that spirals appear at such vastly different scales, from tiny shells to enormous galaxies, suggests that they're a fundamental pattern in nature. They're not imposed from outside. They emerge naturally from the laws of physics, from the way matter and energy interact, from the constraints of space and time. Now, let's talk about the golden ratio a bit more. This number, approximately 1.618, has fascinated mathematicians, artists, and philosophers for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks knew about it, and they used it in their architecture and art. The Parthenon in Athens, for example, is said to incorporate the golden ratio in its proportions. Whether this was intentional or intuitive, we can't be sure, but the result is a building that feels balanced, harmonious, and pleasing to the eye. During the Renaissance, artists like Leonardo da Vinci studied the golden ratio and used it in their work. Da Vinci's famous drawing, The Vitruvian Man, shows a human figure with proportions based on the golden ratio. The idea was that the human body embodies perfect proportions, and that understanding these proportions could help artists create more realistic and beautiful representations of the human form. The golden ratio also appears in music. Some composers have used it to structure their compositions, dividing pieces into sections that relate to each other according to the golden ratio. The idea is that this creates a sense of balance and flow, making the music more pleasing to listen to. Whether this actually works, or whether it's more of a mathematical curiosity, is a matter of debate. But it shows how the golden ratio has captured the human imagination across different fields and cultures. In nature, the golden ratio appears in many living things. The length of your forearm compared to your hand, for example, is often close to the golden ratio. The same is true for other parts of the body. Your face, too, can be divided into sections that approximate the golden ratio. The distance from your chin to your nose, compared to the distance from your nose to your eyebrows, compared to the distance from your eyebrows to the top of your head, these ratios often cluster around 1.618. Now, it's important to note that these aren't exact. The human body is variable, and individual proportions differ. But the tendency is there, and it's strong enough to be noticeable. Some researchers have suggested that faces with proportions closer to the golden ratio are perceived as more attractive. The theory is that symmetry and balance signal health and genetic fitness, and that our brains are wired to recognize and prefer these features. But not everyone agrees with this theory. Critics point out that beauty is subjective, and that cultural factors play a large role in what we find attractive. They also argue that the golden ratio is often found where people look for it, a kind of confirmation bias. If you go looking for the golden ratio in nature, you're likely to find it, even if it's not really there. So we should be cautious about over-interpreting the presence of this number. Still, there's no denying that the golden ratio has a certain appeal. It represents a kind of ideal, balance, a proportion that feels just right. And whether it's truly fundamental to nature or just a mathematical curiosity that we've projected onto the world, it's undeniably beautiful. Let's shift our focus now to the history of the Fibonacci sequence. As I mentioned earlier, it was introduced to Europe by Leonardo of Pisa, a mathematician who lived in the 12th and 13th centuries. Leonardo, known as Fibonacci, traveled widely as a young man, learning mathematics from Arab and Indian scholars. At the time, Europe was still using Roman numerals, which made calculation difficult. Fibonacci introduced the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, the one we use today, to Europe. This system, with its place values and the concept of zero, made arithmetic much easier and more efficient. Fibonacci's most famous work is a book called Liber Abaci, or the Book of Calculation. In this book, he presented many mathematical problems and solutions, including the rabbit problem that introduced the Fibonacci sequence. The sequence itself wasn't new. It had been known to Indian mathematicians centuries earlier, but Fibonacci brought it to the attention of European scholars, and it's been named after him ever since. For centuries, the Fibonacci sequence was seen as a mathematical curiosity, interesting but not particularly important. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that scientists and mathematicians began to realize how widespread the sequence was in nature. They started finding it in plant growth, in animal populations, in the structure of shells and spirals. And as they looked more closely, they discovered connections between the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. One of the key insights was that if you take any two consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci sequence and divide the larger by the smaller, you get a number that's close to the golden ratio, and the further you go in the sequence, the closer you get. For example, 5 divided by 3 is about 1.67, 8 divided by 5 is 1.6, 13 divided by 8 is 1.625, 21 divided by 13 is about 1.615, and so on. As the numbers get larger, the ratio approaches 1.618, the golden ratio, more and more closely. This connection between the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio is one of the reasons why both appear so often in nature. They're mathematically related, two sides of the same coin. And because natural processes often involve growth and proportion, the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio naturally emerge. In the 20th century, scientists began to study these patterns more rigorously. They used computers to model plant growth and simulate the formation of spirals. They analyzed thousands of flowers, counting petals and measuring angles. They examined shells, galaxies, and weather systems. And what they found was that the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio weren't just occasional curiosities. They were widespread, appearing in a huge variety of contexts. This led to a deeper question: why? Why does nature favor these patterns? Is it just coincidence, or is there something more fundamental going on? The answer, as we've explored, seems to be efficiency. Natural selection favors organisms that can grow quickly, use resources efficiently, and reproduce successfully. And the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, it turns out, are optimal solutions to many of the problems that living things face. Now, let's think about the role of mathematics in understanding nature. Mathematics is often seen as an abstract discipline, something that exists in the realm of pure thought, separate from the physical world. But the discovery of patterns like the Fibonacci sequence in nature challenges this view. It suggests that mathematics isn't just a human invention, it's a language that describes the structure of reality. This idea goes back to the ancient Greeks, to philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato. They believed that the universe was fundamentally mathematical, that numbers and geometric shapes were the building blocks of reality. This view fell out of favor for a while, but it's been revived in modern times. Today, physicists and mathematicians often talk about the universe as being governed by mathematical laws, and they use equations to describe everything from the motion of planets to the behavior of subatomic particles. The presence of the Fibonacci sequence in nature is one piece of evidence for this view. It shows that mathematical patterns aren't just abstract concepts. They're real, physical phenomena that we can observe and measure, and understanding these patterns can help us make sense of the world around us. But there's also a cautionary note here. Just because we can find mathematical patterns in nature doesn't mean that nature is nothing but mathematics. Living things are complex, dynamic, and unpredictable. They're shaped by evolution, by chance, by countless interactions with their environment. Mathematics can describe these patterns, but it can't fully capture the richness and diversity of life. Still, the connection between mathematics and nature is profound. It suggests that there's an underlying order to the universe, a set of rules that govern how things grow, change, and interact. And by studying these rules, by looking for patterns and connections, we can gain a deeper understanding of the world around us. The Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are part of this larger story. They're examples of how simple mathematical rules can give rise to complex, beautiful structures. And they remind us that the universe is not random or chaotic. It's organized, patterned, and in its own way, elegant. As we continue our journey tonight, we'll see more examples of these patterns. We'll explore how they appear in different contexts, how they're connected to each other, and what they can teach us about the nature of life and the universe. But for now, let's just pause and appreciate the beauty of these spirals, these ratios, these numbers that wind through the world like threads of gold. Let's turn our attention now to something a bit more personal. the human body. As I mentioned earlier, the proportions of the human body often approximate the golden ratio, but there's more to it than just measurements. The way our bodies grow and develop also reflect these patterns. When a baby is born, its proportions are different from an adult's. The head is relatively large compared to the body, the limbs are short, and the torso is long. But as the child grows, these proportions change. The head becomes relatively smaller, the limbs lengthen, and the body takes on more adult proportions. This growth isn't random. It follows specific patterns, guided by genes and hormones. Interestingly, some researchers have found that the ratios between different parts of the body, as they change during growth, often pass through values close to the golden ratio. This suggests that the golden ratio might play a role in the biological processes that control growth and development. It's not that the body is trying to achieve the golden ratio, rather the underlying mechanisms of growth, the way cells divide and tissues expand, naturally produce proportions that approximate this value. The same is true for other aspects of human anatomy. The structure of the inner ear, for example, has a spiral shape similar to a nautilus shell. This spiral helps us perceive sound, directing sound waves into the cochlea where they're converted into electrical signals that the brain can interpret. The spiral shape is efficient, allowing the ear to capture a wide range of frequencies in a compact space. Even our DNA has a spiral structure. The famous double helix, discovered by Watson and Crick in 1953, is a pair of intertwined spirals. The proportions of this spiral, the distance between turns, and the width of the helix are related to the golden ratio. This isn't just a curiosity. The structure of DNA is crucial to its function, allowing it to store genetic information and replicate accurately. So the patterns we see in sunflowers and seashells aren't separate from us. They're part of us, woven into the very fabric of our bodies. We are, in a sense, living embodiments of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. And recognizing this connection can give us a deeper appreciation for the beauty and complexity of life. Let's drift deeper into the world of plants now, because there's so much more to discover about how these patterns shape the green world around us. When you walk through a forest, or even just look at the plants in your garden, you're seeing the results of millions of years of evolution, of trial and error, of nature finding the best solutions to complex problems. And so often, those solutions involve the Fibonacci sequence. Think about the way a vine grows, winding its way up a tree or a trellis. It doesn't grow straight up. Instead, it spirals, wrapping around the support as it climbs. This spiral growth serves multiple purposes. It gives the vine stability, anchoring it firmly to the support. It allows the vine to reach sunlight more effectively, positioning its leaves at different heights and angles. And it's flexible, allowing the vine to adjust to changes in its environment, to grow around obstacles, to reach for new supports. The angle of this spiral, once again, is often close to the golden angle. This ensures that the vine's leaves don't overlap too much, that each leaf gets its share of sunlight. It's the same principle we saw with leaf arrangement on a stem, but applied to the entire growth of the plant. And it works beautifully, allowing vines to thrive in crowded, competitive environments where every bit of sunlight matters. Now, let's think about seeds for a moment. Not just the way they're arranged in a sunflower head, but the way they're designed. Many seeds have a shape that allows them to travel, to disperse away from the parent plant. Some have wings, like maple seeds, that spin as they fall, carrying them far from the tree. Some have parachutes, like dandelion seeds, that catch the wind and float for miles. And some have hooks or barbs that catch on animal fur, hitching a ride to new locations. These seed designs are incredibly sophisticated. They've evolved over millions of years to maximize the chances that at least some seeds will find a good place to grow. And while not all seed designs involve the Fibonacci sequence directly, many do involve spirals, curves, and proportions that reflect the same underlying principles of efficiency and balance. Take a pinecone, for example. It's not just a container for seeds, it's a carefully engineered structure that protects the seeds until conditions are right for germination, then opens up to release them. The scales of a pinecone are arranged in two spirals, one going clockwise, the other counterclockwise. And if you count the number of spirals in each direction, you'll usually find Fibonacci numbers. This arrangement allows the scales to fit together perfectly, with no gaps, creating a strong protective structure. When the pinecone dries out, the scales open, releasing the seeds. But they don't all open at once. The spiral arrangement means that the cone opens gradually, from the outside in, giving the seeds time to catch the wind and disperse. It's an elegant system, and it's been working for hundreds of millions of years. Let's shift our attention now to the animal kingdom, because the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio appear here too, in ways that are sometimes surprising. We've already talked about shells, but there are many other examples. Think about the horns of a ram or a goat. They curve in a spiral, growing outward from the head. This spiral shape serves several purposes. It makes the horns strong, able to withstand the impact of combat. It also makes the horn lighter than it would be if it were straight, reducing the load on the animal's neck and head. The spiral also allows the horn to grow continuously throughout the animal's life, without becoming too heavy or unbalanced. Each new layer of growth is proportionally larger than the last, maintaining the same curve, the same shape. It's the same principle we saw with the nautilus shell, applied to a completely different structure. Or consider the claws of some animals, like cats or raptors. These claws curve in a gentle arc, a shape that's both sharp and strong. The curve distributes stress along the length of the claw, making it less likely to break. And it allows the claw to grip effectively, to dig into bark or flesh and hold on tight. The angle and shape of this curve often approximate the golden ratio, creating a claw that's optimally designed for its purpose. Even in the microscopic world, we find these patterns. Some single-celled organisms, like certain types of algae and bacteria, grow in spirals. As they divide and multiply, they arrange themselves in patterns that echo the Fibonacci sequence. This isn't conscious design, of course. These organisms don't have brains or nervous systems, but the chemical and physical processes that govern their growth naturally produce these patterns. The same is true for larger organisms. The way embryos develop, the way tissues grow and differentiate, these processes are governed by genes and proteins that interact in complex ways. And out of this complexity, patterns emerge: spirals, symmetries, proportions that reflect the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. It's as if these patterns are embedded in the very machinery of life, in the molecules and cells that make up every living thing. This universality is what's so striking about the Fibonacci sequence. It's not limited to one type of organism or one type of structure. It appears in plants and animals, in microscopic organisms and giant galaxies. It's woven through the fabric of nature at every level, from the smallest to the largest. Now, let's think about time for a moment, because the Fibonacci sequence doesn't just describe spatial patterns, it also appears in patterns that unfold over time. We've already mentioned the rabbit population problem that Fibonacci posed, but there are other examples. Consider the life cycle of bees. A male bee, called a drone, develops from an unfertilized egg. This means he has only one parent, a mother, but no father. A female bee, a worker or queen, develops from a fertilized egg, so she has two parents, a mother and a father. If you trace the ancestry of a male bee backwards, you find a surprising pattern. He has one parent, two grandparents, three great-grandparents, five great-great-grandparents, and so on. The numbers follow the Fibonacci sequence. This happens because of the unusual way bees reproduce, with males developing from unfertilized eggs. It's a biological quirk that creates a mathematical pattern, and it shows how the Fibonacci sequence can emerge from the simplest rules, even in something as complex as genetics and reproduction. Or think about the growth of a population over time. Not just rabbits, but any species that reproduces in generations. If you start with a small population and it doubles each generation, the growth is exponential. But real populations don't usually grow that smoothly. There are constraints. Resources are limited, competition increases, predators and diseases take a toll. So the growth rate fluctuates, speeding up and slowing down in patterns that can be quite complex. In some cases, these fluctuations follow patterns related to the Fibonacci sequence. The population might grow rapidly for a few generations, then level off, then grow again. The intervals between growth spurts, the size of the population at different times, these numbers can sometimes be approximated by Fibonacci numbers. It's not a perfect fit and it depends on many factors, but the tendency is there, a subtle echo of this mathematical pattern in the ebb and flow of life. This temporal aspect of the Fibonacci sequence reminds us that these patterns aren't static, they're dynamic, unfolding over time, responding to changes in the environment. And this dynamism is part of what makes them so powerful. They're not rigid formulas that nature must follow, they're flexible patterns that emerge naturally from the processes of growth, reproduction, and adaptation. Let's turn our gaze upward now, to the stars and galaxies. Because even in the vastness of space, we find these same patterns. Many galaxies have a spiral structure, with arms that curve outward from a central bulge. Our own Milky Way galaxy is a spiral galaxy, with 4 major arms and several smaller ones. These spiral arms aren't solid structures. They're regions where stars, gas, and dust are more densely packed. As the galaxy rotates, these density waves move through it like ripples on a pond. Stars and gas clouds drift in and out of the spiral arms, but the arms themselves persist, maintaining their shape over millions of years. The shape of these spiral arms often approximate a logarithmic spiral, the same type of spiral we see in nautilus shells and sunflower heads. This isn't just a coincidence. The laws of physics that govern the motion of stars and gas in a galaxy naturally produce this type of spiral. It's the most stable configuration. the shape that allows the galaxy to rotate smoothly without tearing itself apart. And just as with other spirals in nature, the proportions of these galactic spirals often approximate the golden ratio. The distance between successive turns, the rate at which the spiral expands, these parameters tend to cluster around values related to the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. This is remarkable when you think about it. A galaxy is a collection of hundreds of billions of stars spread across tens of thousands of light years. And yet, it organizes itself into a pattern that's mathematically identical to the pattern in a seashell that fits in the palm of your hand. It suggests that there are universal principles at work, laws of nature that apply at every scale, from the microscopic to the cosmic. The same is true for other astronomical phenomena. The way planets orbit stars, the way moons orbit planets, these motions often follow patterns related to simple ratios and harmonics. It's not exactly the Fibonacci sequence, but it's similar in spirit. Patterns of resonance and balance that emerge from the gravitational interactions between celestial bodies. Even the structure of the universe itself, the way galaxies cluster together into vast filaments and voids, shows patterns that echo fractal geometry. It's as if the universe is a vast cosmic artwork, painted with mathematical brushstrokes, organized according to principles that we're only beginning to understand. Let's come back down to Earth now and think about water. Water is essential to life, and the way it moves and flows creates patterns that are both beautiful and complex. Rivers, for example, don't flow in straight lines. They meander, curving back and forth across the landscape, and these meanders often follow patterns that approximate logarithmic spirals. It's because of the way water erodes and deposits sediment. On the outside of a curve where the current is faster, the water erodes the bank, cutting deeper into the land. On the inside of the curve where the current is slower, sediment is deposited, building up the bank. Over time, this process causes the river to curve more and more, creating meanders that loop across the floodplain. The shape of these meanders, the ratio between the radius of curvature and the wavelength of the meander, often approximate values related to the golden ratio. It's not a perfect match because rivers are influenced by many factors: the slope of the land, the type of soil, the amount of water flowing through them. But the tendency is there, a subtle pattern that emerges from the physics of flowing water. The same is true for ocean waves. Waves are created by wind blowing across the surface of the water. As they travel, they organize themselves into patterns, with larger waves separated by specific distances. The relationship between wave height, wavelength, and speed follow mathematical equations that in some cases produce values related to the Fibonacci sequence. And if you've ever watched a whirlpool or a vortex, you've seen another example of spiral motion in water. These spirals form when water flows through a narrow opening or encounters an obstacle. The rotation creates a low-pressure zone in the center, pulling water toward it in a spiral pattern. The shape of this spiral, once again, often approximates a logarithmic spiral with proportions related to the golden ratio. Even in the way raindrops fall and splash, in the ripples that spread across a pond, we can find echoes of these mathematical patterns. Water, it seems, has a natural tendency to organize itself into spirals, curves, and rhythms that reflect the same principles we've been exploring. Now, let's think about sound and music for a moment, because the golden ratio appears here too, in ways that are both subtle and profound. Music is organized around patterns, rhythms, scales, harmonies, and these patterns often involve simple ratios between frequencies. For example, an octave is a doubling of frequency. If one note has a frequency of 440 Hz, the note one octave higher has a frequency of 880 Hz. A perfect fifth, one of the most consonant intervals in music, has a frequency ratio of 3 to 2. A perfect fourth has a ratio of 4 to 3. These simple ratios create harmonies that sound pleasing to our ears. The golden ratio, with its value of approximately 1.618, doesn't correspond exactly to any of the standard musical intervals, but some composers have experimented with using it to structure their compositions. They might divide a piece into sections whose lengths relate to each other according to the golden ratio, or they might use the Fibonacci sequence to determine the number of beats in each measure, or the number of measures in each section. The Hungarian composer Béla Bartók is said to have used the Fibonacci sequence in some of his compositions. He would structure pieces so that climaxes or important transitions occurred at points that divided the piece according to Fibonacci ratios. Whether this actually makes the music sound better is a matter of debate, but it shows how the Fibonacci sequence has captured the imagination of artists and composers, inspiring them to explore new ways of organizing sound and time. There's also a theory that the structure of the human ear, with its spiral cochlea, is optimized for certain frequency ratios, and that these ratios, which evolved over millions of years to help us perceive sound, might be related to the golden ratio. If this is true, it would suggest that our perception of musical harmony is rooted in the same mathematical patterns that govern the growth of plants and the spirals of galaxies. Let's explore now the deeper question: why? Why does the Fibonacci sequence appear so often in nature? We've talked about efficiency, about optimal packing, about balanced growth. But is there something more fundamental going on? One answer comes from the field of mathematical biology. Researchers have developed computer models that simulate the growth of plants and other organisms. These models use simple rules, like add new material in the most available space, or grow at a rate proportional to the amount of resources available. And when they run these simulations, they find that Fibonacci patterns emerge naturally without being programmed in. This suggests that the Fibonacci sequence isn't something nature has to work to achieve. It's a natural consequence of the way growth processes work. When you have a system that grows incrementally, adding new parts based on the arrangement of existing parts, and when that growth is constrained by space or resources, Fibonacci patterns tend to emerge. It's a bit like the way snowflakes form. Each snowflake is unique, with its own intricate pattern, but all snowflakes have a six-fold symmetry, and they all follow certain basic rules. This happens because of the molecular structure of water and the way ice crystals grow. The conditions, temperature, humidity, air currents, affect the details, but the underlying pattern is determined by the mathematics of growth, by the constraints of space and resources, by the physics and chemistry of living systems. This is a profound insight. It tells us that the order we see in nature isn't imposed from outside. It emerges from within, from the properties of matter and energy, from the rules that govern how things interact and change. The universe organizes itself, creating patterns and structures without any guiding intelligence or plan. And yet, these patterns are beautiful. They're elegant, harmonious, satisfying to contemplate. This raises a philosophical question. Why should the universe be beautiful? Why should the laws of nature produce patterns that we, as conscious beings, find aesthetically pleasing? There's no easy answer to this question. Some people see it as evidence of a deeper order, a cosmic intelligence that designed the universe to be beautiful. Others see it as a fortunate accident, a consequence of the particular laws of physics that happen to govern our universe. And still others argue that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, that we find these patterns beautiful because our brains evolved to recognize patterns, and that this ability helped our ancestors survive. Whatever the answer, the fact remains the universe is full of beautiful patterns, and the Fibonacci sequence is one of them. Let's take a moment now to think about how these patterns have influenced human culture and creativity. Throughout history, people have been drawn to spirals, symmetries, and proportions that echo the golden ratio. This shows up in art, architecture, design, and even in the way we organize our societies. The ancient Egyptians built the pyramids with proportions that some researchers believe incorporate the golden ratio. Whether this was intentional or intuitive is unclear. The Egyptians didn't leave detailed records of their mathematical methods, but the result is striking. Structures that have endured for thousands of years, that continue to inspire awe and wonder. The ancient Greeks were more explicit about their use of mathematical proportions. They believed that beauty was a matter of harmony and proportion, that there were objective standards of beauty based on mathematical relationships. The Parthenon, the temple to Athena on the Acropolis in Athens, was designed with careful attention to proportion. The ratio between the height and width of the facade, the spacing of the columns, the dimensions of the interior chambers, all of these were carefully calculated to create a sense of balance and harmony. Whether the golden ratio was specifically used in the Parthenon's design is a matter of debate among scholars. Some measurements suggest it was, others don't. But what's clear is that the Greeks valued mathematical proportion and that they used it to create buildings that have been admired for over 2,000 years. During the Middle Ages, this interest in mathematical proportion continued in the design of cathedrals and churches. Gothic cathedrals, with their soaring arches and intricate rose windows, were built according to geometric principles. The architects, many of whom were also stonemasons and craftsmen, used simple tools, compasses, straight edges, and ropes to lay out these complex structures. And embedded in the designs are patterns and proportions that reflect a deep understanding of geometry. The Renaissance saw a revival of interest in classical art and mathematics. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci studied human anatomy, measuring the proportions of the body with great precision. Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, a drawing of a human figure inscribed in a circle and a square, is one of the most famous images in the history of art. It represents the Renaissance ideal of the human being as the measure of all things, perfectly proportioned and balanced. Da Vinci also studied the golden ratio and is said to have used it in some of his paintings. The composition of the Mona Lisa, for example, has been analyzed for its use of golden ratio proportions. Whether this was conscious or unconscious, whether it actually contributes to the painting's beauty, these are questions that art historians continue to debate. But there's no doubt that Da Vinci was deeply interested in the mathematics of proportion, and that this interest influenced his art. In more recent times, the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence have continued to fascinate artists and designers. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a movement in art and architecture called the Arts and Crafts movement, which emphasized craftsmanship, natural materials, and designs inspired by nature. Many arts and crafts designers incorporated spirals, curves, and natural forms into their work, creating furniture, textiles, and buildings that reflected the patterns found in plants and shells. In the 20th century, modern architects like Le Corbusier developed systems of proportion based on the golden ratio. Le Corbusier created the modular, a system of measurements based on the human body and the golden ratio, which he used to design buildings. The idea was that buildings designed according to these proportions would be more harmonious, more comfortable, more human in scale. Whether this actually worked is, again, a matter of debate, but the attempt shows how deeply the golden ratio has influenced architectural thinking. In graphic design and typography, the golden ratio is often used to create layouts that are balanced and pleasing to the eye. Designers might use it to determine the width of columns of text, the size of margins, the proportions of images and graphics. Some typefaces are designed with letter forms whose proportions approximate the golden ratio. And in product design, from smartphones to cars to furniture, designers often use the golden ratio to create objects that feel well proportioned and aesthetically pleasing. Apple, for example, is said to have used the golden ratio in the design of some of its products, though the company itself doesn't confirm this. The golden ratio has also influenced photography and cinematography. The rule of thirds, a guideline for composing images, divides the frame into 9 equal parts with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines. Important elements of the composition are placed along these lines or at their intersections. While this isn't exactly the golden ratio, it's based on similar principles of balance and proportion. Some photographers prefer to use the golden ratio more directly, dividing the frame according to the golden ratio rather than in thirds. This creates a slightly different balance, with the focal point offset from the center in a way that some find more dynamic and interesting. Now, let's think about the limitations of these patterns, because while the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are widespread in nature, they're not universal. Not every plant arranges its leaves according to the golden angle. Not every flower has a Fibonacci number of petals. Not every spiral in nature is a perfect logarithmic spiral. Nature is messy, variable, unpredictable. Evolution doesn't produce perfect designs. It produces designs that are good enough to survive and reproduce. And good enough often means something that approximates an optimal solution, but isn't exactly perfect. This is important to remember because there's a tendency to see patterns where they might not really exist. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. Our brains are wired to look for order, to find connections, to see meaning in randomness. This is a useful ability. It helps us make sense of the world. But it can also lead us astray, causing us to see patterns that are just coincidences. So when we talk about the Fibonacci sequence in nature, we need to be careful. We need to distinguish between genuine patterns, where the mathematics is clearly present and serves a function, and apparent patterns, where we might be reading too much into the data. Scientists use statistical methods to test whether patterns are real or just coincidences. They collect large amounts of data, measure carefully, and use mathematical tests to determine whether the patterns they observe are statistically significant. And in many cases, the patterns are real. The Fibonacci sequence really does appear in sunflower seed heads, in pinecone scales, in the spirals of shells. But in other cases, the evidence is less clear, and we need to be cautious about drawing conclusions. This scientific rigor is important. It keeps us honest, preventing us from seeing what we want to see rather than what's actually there. And it helps us understand the true extent and limits of these patterns in nature. Let's explore now some of the more speculative ideas about the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. Because alongside the solid science, there's a whole realm of mysticism, numerology, and pseudoscience that has grown up around these numbers. Some people believe that the golden ratio is a divine proportion, evidence of a cosmic intelligence that designed the universe. They point to its appearance in nature, in art, in the human body, as proof that there's a deeper order to reality, a hidden code that reveals the mind of God. Others have taken this further, claiming that the golden ratio has mystical or spiritual properties. They say that objects designed according to the golden ratio have special energies, that they promote healing or consciousness or spiritual growth. Some alternative medicine practitioners have incorporated the golden ratio into their treatments, though there's no scientific evidence that this does anything. In popular culture, the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio have taken on an almost mythical status. They appear in movies, novels, and TV shows as symbols of hidden knowledge or secret codes. Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, features the Fibonacci sequence prominently, using it as a clue in a mystery involving hidden secrets and ancient conspiracies. While these cultural representations are entertaining, they often exaggerate or distort the actual mathematics. The Fibonacci sequence becomes a kind of magical formula imbued with powers it doesn't really have, and the golden ratio becomes a symbol of perfection, when in reality, it's just a number with interesting mathematical properties. It's important to separate the science from the speculation. The Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are fascinating because of what they actually are: mathematical patterns that emerge naturally from the laws of physics and the processes of growth. They don't need to be mystified or mythologized to be interesting. The truth is remarkable enough. At the same time, we shouldn't dismiss the human fascination with these patterns. There's something deep in the human psyche that responds to symmetry, proportion, and harmony. We find these patterns beautiful, and that beauty has inspired art, music, architecture, and philosophy for thousands of years. This cultural dimension is part of the story, even if it's not strictly scientific. Let's turn now to some practical applications of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. Because beyond their appearance in nature and their influence on art, these patterns have practical uses in technology, engineering, and computer science. One example is in the design of antennas. Some antennas are built with spirals that follow the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio. This allows them to receive signals across a wide range of frequencies efficiently. The spiral shape means that different parts of the antenna are optimized for different wavelengths, creating a broadband antenna that can handle multiple frequencies at once. In computer science, the Fibonacci sequence is used in algorithms and data structures. Fibonacci heaps, for example, are a type of data structure that uses properties of the Fibonacci sequence to perform certain operations efficiently. They're used in algorithms for finding shortest paths in networks, for optimizing resource allocation, and for other computational tasks. The golden ratio also appears in search algorithms. Fibonacci search is a technique for finding a target value in a sorted list. It uses Fibonacci numbers to divide the list into sections, allowing the algorithm to find the target quickly and efficiently. While binary search is more commonly used today, Fibonacci search has some advantages in certain situations. In architecture and urban planning, the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are sometimes used to create harmonious designs and layouts. City planners might use these proportions to determine the spacing of buildings, the width of streets, the size of parks and public spaces. The idea is that designs based on these natural proportions will feel more comfortable and inviting to people. In finance, the Fibonacci sequence appears in technical analysis, a method traders use to predict stock price movements. They use Fibonacci retracement levels, which are horizontal lines that indicate where support and resistance are likely to occur. These levels are calculated by taking key points on a stock chart and dividing the vertical distance by key Fibonacci ratios. Whether this actually works is controversial. Many economists are skeptical of technical analysis, but it shows how the Fibonacci sequence has found its way into even the world of finance. Now, let's think about the future. What more might we discover about the Fibonacci sequence and its role in nature? As our scientific tools become more sophisticated, as we are able to measure and model natural systems with greater precision, we're likely to uncover new examples of these patterns and new insights into why they appear. One promising area of research is in developmental biology, the study of how organisms grow and develop from a single fertilized egg into a complex multicellular creature. Scientists are using advanced imaging techniques to watch this process in real time, tracking how cells divide, migrate, and differentiate. And they're finding that the patterns of cell division and tissue growth often reflect the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. By understanding the genetic and molecular mechanisms that produce these patterns, scientists hope to gain insights into birth defects and developmental disorders. If we can understand how normal development produces these harmonious patterns, we might be able to identify what goes wrong when development is disrupted. Another area of research is in materials science. Engineers are studying the spiral structures found in nature, seashells, horns, bones, to create new materials that are strong, lightweight, and efficient. By mimicking these natural designs, they hope to develop better armor, stronger building materials, more efficient aerospace structures. Biomimicry, the practice of learning from and imitating nature's designs, is becoming increasingly important in technology and engineering, and the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are central to this approach. By understanding the mathematical principles that underlie natural structures, we can apply those principles to solve human problems. There's also growing interest in the role of the golden ratio in aesthetics and psychology. Researchers are using brain imaging techniques to study what happens in our brains when we look at images with golden ratio proportions. They're finding that certain brain regions, particularly those involved in reward and pleasure, become more active. This suggests that there may be a neurological basis for our attraction to these proportions. Understanding this could have applications in design, architecture, marketing, anywhere that visual appeal matters. If we can identify the specific features that make images appealing, we can design products, buildings, and spaces that people find more attractive and comfortable. Let's slow down now and take a more contemplative approach, because beyond all the science and mathematics, there's something profound about the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. They remind us that the universe is not random, that there's an underlying order, a structure that connects the smallest and the largest scales of existence. When you look at a sunflower, you're seeing the same pattern that appears in a galaxy billions of light years away. When you trace the spiral of a seashell, you're following a curve that's mathematically identical to the spiral of your own ear. When you observe the way leaves arrange themselves on a stem, You're witnessing a process that's governed by the same principles that shape the structure of DNA. This interconnectedness is humbling. It reminds us that we're part of something larger, that the same laws that govern the stars and galaxies also govern our own bodies, our own lives. We're not separate from nature. We're embedded in it, made of the same materials, shaped by the same forces. And yet, we're also unique. We're conscious beings, capable of understanding these patterns, of appreciating their beauty, of wondering about their meaning. This ability to step back and observe, to analyze and understand, is what makes us human. It's what allows us to do science, to create art, to tell stories about the world. The Fibonacci sequence is one of those stories. It's a narrative thread that runs through the natural world, connecting plants and animals, shells and galaxies, growth and form. By following this thread, by tracing these spirals and patterns, we can glimpse the hidden architecture of reality. And there's a meditative quality to this exploration. Contemplating these patterns can be calming, centering, a way to quiet the busy mind and connect with something deeper. As you imagine these spirals, these curves, these proportions unfolding in nature, you can feel a sense of peace, a recognition that you're part of this vast, beautiful, ordered universe. Let's think about what it means to find beauty in mathematics. For some people, math is dry, abstract, disconnected from the real world. But for others, math is a source of wonder, a way of seeing patterns and connections that might otherwise remain hidden. The Fibonacci sequence is a perfect example of mathematical beauty. There's something elegant about its simplicity. Just two rules: start with 1 and 1, then add the previous two numbers to get the next one. From this simple beginning, an infinite sequence unfolds, each number connected to all the others, growing steadily but never losing its underlying pattern. And then there's the surprise of discovery, the moment you realize that this abstract mathematical sequence appears in the real world, that the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of sunflower seeds, the proportions of your own body all reflect this same pattern. It's a moment of connection, of recognition, a glimpse of the hidden order beneath the surface of things. Mathematicians talk about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, the mysterious fact that mathematical concepts developed in pure abstraction often turn out to describe real physical phenomena. The Fibonacci sequence is a prime example. It was discovered as a mathematical curiosity, a solution to a problem about rabbit populations, but it turned out to be far more than that. It's a fundamental pattern in nature, a key to understanding growth and form. This effectiveness is one of the deepest mysteries in science. Why should the universe be mathematical? Why should abstract patterns of logic and number correspond to the physical world? There's no easy answer, but the question itself is profound. It touches on the nature of reality, on the relationship between mind and matter, on what it means to understand. For some, this mathematical order is evidence of a designed universe, a cosmos created by an intelligence that wrote its signature in the language of numbers. For others, it's simply the way things are, a brute fact that requires no explanation. And for still others, it's a puzzle that invites further inquiry, a mystery that science will continue to explore. Whatever your perspective, the Fibonacci sequence stands as a beautiful example of the deep connection between mathematics and nature, a reminder that the universe is both comprehensible and full of wonder. Let's drift now into the realm of imagination. Imagine you're a seed falling from a sunflower head. You spiral down for the air carried by the wind. You land on the ground, settle into the soil, and then, if conditions are right, you begin to grow. First, a tiny root pushes down into the earth, spiraling as it goes, searching for water and nutrients. Then a shoot pushes up toward the light, breaking through the surface, unfurling its first leaves. And as you grow, you follow the ancient pattern, each new leaf positioned at the golden angle from the last, spiraling up the stem. You don't know why you grow this way. You don't think about angles or ratios. You simply grow, following the instructions encoded in your DNA, responding to the hormones that flow through your cells. But the result is a pattern, a spiral, a structure that's both beautiful and functional. As you mature, you produce a flower head, and in that flower head, seeds begin to form, arranged in two spirals, one clockwise, one counterclockwise. Each seed finds its place in the pattern, packing tightly with its neighbors, filling the available space with maximum efficiency. And when you mature and die, your seeds fall to the ground and the cycle begins again. This is the life of a plant, lived according to the Fibonacci sequence. It's unconscious, automatic, the result of millions of years of evolution. But it's also elegant, harmonious, a dance of growth and form that reflects the deep mathematical structure of the universe. Or imagine you're a nautilus, a cephalopod living in a spiral shell. As you grow, you add new chambers to your shell, each one slightly larger than the last, maintaining the same proportions, the same curve. The spiral grows with you, providing shelter and buoyancy, allowing you to move through the water with grace and efficiency. You don't understand the mathematics of your shell, you simply grow, adding new material according to the biological programs that govern your development. But the result is a structure of exquisite beauty, a spiral that has fascinated humans for thousands of years. This is what it means to be part of nature, to be shaped by patterns that are larger than yourself, that connect you to every other living thing, that link the present moment to the deep past and the distant future. Let's consider now the relationship between order and chaos, because while the Fibonacci sequence represents order, pattern, predictability, the natural world is also full of chaos, randomness, unpredictability, and it's the interplay between these two that creates the rich diversity of life. Evolution works through variation and selection. Random mutations create new variations in organisms. Most of these mutations are neutral or harmful, but occasionally one is beneficial. And when a beneficial mutation arises, natural selection favors it, allowing organisms with that mutation to survive and reproduce more successfully. Over millions of years, this process shapes the characteristics of species, adapting them to their environments. And one of the things that evolution has discovered again and again is that the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are efficient solutions to many problems. But evolution doesn't produce perfect solutions. It produces good enough solutions. And good enough means that there's always variation, always imperfection, always room for further adaptation. So while we see Fibonacci patterns throughout nature, they're never exact. They're approximations, tendencies, general rules that admit exceptions. This variation is essential. It's what allows species to adapt to changing environments, to survive catastrophes, to evolve new forms. If every organism followed the same pattern exactly, with no variation, the species would be vulnerable to any change in conditions. But with variation, there's always a chance that some individuals will be better suited to the new conditions, and those individuals will survive and pass on their genes. So the order represented by the Fibonacci sequence exists in tension with the chaos of random variation. And it's this tension, this balance between pattern and possibility that drives the evolution of life. This has philosophical implications. It suggests that the universe is neither purely ordered nor purely chaotic. It's both, simultaneously. There are patterns, structures, laws that govern how things behave, but there's also randomness, chance, unpredictability, and out of this interplay between the two, complexity emerges. This is true not just in biology, but in many other systems as well. Weather, for example, is governed by physical laws, equations that describe how air and water move, how heat transfers, how pressure changes. But weather is also chaotic, extremely sensitive to initial conditions, unpredictable beyond a certain point. And out of this chaos, patterns emerge: storm systems, jet streams, seasonal cycles. The Fibonacci sequence reminds us that order exists, that patterns are real, but it also reminds us that this order is not absolute, that it coexists with chaos, with randomness, with the endless creativity of the universe. As we near the end of our journey tonight, let's reflect on what we've discovered. We started with a simple question: why does the Fibonacci sequence appear so often in nature? And we've explored many answers: efficiency in packing, optimal angles for capturing sunlight, balanced growth that maintains proportions as organisms get larger, mathematical patterns that emerge naturally from the processes of growth and development. But perhaps the deepest answer is this: the Fibonacci sequence appears in nature because it represents a fundamental principle of organization, a way that matter and energy naturally arrange themselves in the presence of constraints and resources. It's not imposed from outside, it emerges from within, from the properties of physical systems, from the mathematics of growth. And this emergence is beautiful, not just aesthetically, though the spirals and proportions are certainly pleasing to look at, but conceptually, philosophically. The idea that order can arise spontaneously from simple rules, that complexity can emerge from simplicity, that the universe organizes itself, this is profound. It means that we live in a universe that is creative, generative, constantly producing new forms and patterns. It means that the laws of nature are not rigid constraints that limit possibility, but flexible principles that enable endless variety. It means that science, the process of discovering and understanding these laws, is a way of connecting with something deeper, something that transcends our individual lives. The Fibonacci sequence is a window into this deeper reality. By studying it, by tracing its appearance through nature, we're not just learning facts and figures, we're glimpsing the hidden architecture of existence, the mathematical scaffolding that supports the visible world. And there's something humbling about this. We're small creatures on a small planet, orbiting an ordinary star in an ordinary galaxy. But we're capable of understanding these patterns, of seeing the connections, of appreciating the beauty. This ability, this consciousness, is itself a profound mystery. How did matter organize itself into brains that can think about mathematics? How did evolution produce minds that can contemplate spirals and ratios and wonder about their meaning? These are questions that science is still working to answer. But in the meantime, we can simply appreciate the fact that we're here, that we're aware, that we can see these patterns and feel a sense of wonder. Let's take a moment to breathe, to relax, to let all of this information settle gently in your mind. You don't need to remember every detail, every example, every explanation. What matters is the overall sense, the feeling of connection, the recognition that there's a hidden order beneath the surface of things. As you drift towards sleep, you might imagine these spirals, these curves, these patterns unfolding around you. A sunflower head with its seeds arranged in perfect spirals, a nautilus shell curving outward in a logarithmic spiral, a galaxy spinning slowly through space, its arms sweeping out in curves that echo the same mathematical principles. These images can be soothing, calming, a way to quiet the mind and relax the body. There's something peaceful about contemplating these patterns, about recognizing the order that exists in nature. It reminds us that the world is not random or chaotic, that there's a structure, a logic, a beauty that we can understand and appreciate. And as you think about these patterns, you might also think about your own body, your own life. You're part of this pattern too. Your body grew according to these same principles, your cells dividing and organizing themselves into tissues and organs, the proportions of your limbs, the spiral of your ear, the branching of your lungs, all reflect the same mathematics that govern the growth of plants and the motion of galaxies. You're not separate from nature. You're embedded in it, made of the same atoms, governed by the same laws. And recognizing this connection can be comforting, grounding, a reminder that you belong here, that you're part of something larger and more ancient than you can fully comprehend. So let yourself relax. Let go of any tension or worry. Imagine yourself floating in a vast spiral, carried along by forces that are gentle and patient. There's no need to struggle, no need to resist. Just allow yourself to be carried, to move with the flow, to rest in the knowledge that everything is unfolding as it should. The Fibonacci sequence is more than just a mathematical curiosity. It's a thread that connects us to the deepest structures of reality, a pattern that appears at every level of existence, from the quantum to the cosmic. And by understanding this pattern, by seeing how it manifests in the world around us, we gain a deeper appreciation for the beauty and complexity of nature. But understanding is just the beginning. The real gift of these patterns is the sense of wonder they inspire, the feeling of connection they create, the peace they bring. When you see a spiral in a seashell and recognize the same spiral in a galaxy, you're experiencing something profound. You're glimpsing the unity beneath the diversity, the simple beneath the complex, the eternal beneath the transient. This is what science at its best can offer, not just knowledge, but wisdom, not just facts, but understanding, not just answers, but better questions. The Fibonacci sequence invites us to look more closely at the world, to see the patterns that surround us, to appreciate the subtle order that shapes everything we see. And it invites us to wonder, to ask why, to seek meaning, to contemplate the mysteries that remain unsolved. Because for all that we've learned about the Fibonacci sequence, there's still much we don't know. Why does the universe favor these particular patterns? Are they inevitable, or could things have been different? What do their presence tell us about the nature of reality? These are questions that science continues to explore, questions that may never have final answers, but the exploration itself is valuable. The journey is worth taking. Because in seeking to understand these patterns, we're engaging in one of the most distinctly human activities, the quest to make sense of the world, to find meaning in the midst of complexity, to connect with something larger than ourselves. As we come to the close of our exploration tonight, let's remember that the Fibonacci sequence is just one example of the patterns that exist in nature. There are many others: fractal geometry in coastlines and mountain ranges, symmetries in crystals and snowflakes, harmonics in sound and light, rhythms in heartbeats and brainwaves. Each of these patterns tells a story, reveals a principle, invites contemplation, and together they paint a picture of a universe that is deeply ordered, mathematically structured, and endlessly creative. A universe that produces stars and planets, life and consciousness, beauty and meaning. We're fortunate to live in a time when we can study these patterns, when we have the tools to measure and model them, when we can share our discoveries with others around the world. The knowledge that previous generations lacked is now available to anyone with curiosity and a desire to learn. But knowledge is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom comes from reflection, from taking the time to think deeply about what we've learned, from integrating new information into a broader understanding of life and existence. And that's what I hope this journey has offered you tonight. Not just information about the Fibonacci sequence, but an opportunity to reflect, to wonder, to connect with the natural world in a deeper way. As you drift off to sleep, you carry with you this knowledge, these images, these patterns. They become part of your inner landscape, enriching your understanding of the world. And perhaps in your dreams, you'll continue the exploration, finding new spirals, new connections, new meanings. The world is full of wonders, and the Fibonacci sequence is one of them. It's a gift, a discovery, a revelation, and it's available to anyone who takes the time to look, to think, to appreciate the subtle beauty that surrounds us. So rest now, knowing that you're part of this beautiful, ordered, mysterious universe. Let the patterns we've explored tonight carry you gently into sleep, spiraling down into dreams where mathematics and nature, science and beauty, knowledge and wonder all blend together in a peaceful harmony. If you found this journey interesting, there are more explorations waiting for you. Each video on this channel is an invitation to slow down, to discover, to appreciate the quiet wonders of science. Thank you for joining me tonight, and sleep well.